Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be all the books that I read in the month of November. So in other words, my November wrap up. One thing before we get started, I am so sorry, but I am using artificial lighting because, and now I'm blind because I look straight at the light. Because it is super gloomy here in Texas, at least where I'm at, and we're supposed to be getting thunderstorms. It's just 4 o'clock in the afternoon and it looks like it's 7 o'clock. So I didn't want to wait and not film today because Lord knows when I'm going to be able to do it again. So I wanted to get it done now. So again, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for the angle. I rearranged my room. My mom is staying here in this room. This is my guest bedroom, so there's a bed here, and so I just had to move everything around. And so whatever, this is what we're working with. So if I'm slanted, crooked, the lighting's bad, I am so sorry. But let's get to the good stuff, and that is to talk about books. So in November, I read a total of 6 books. And I'm pretty happy with what I read. So let's get right into it. The first book that I read for the month of November is Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. I always want to say Marissa Peschel, but it is Marisha Pessl. And I am so glad that I finally got to this book. It's been on my TBR forever and ever and ever and ever. In other words, my bookshelves, because I don't, like you guys know, I don't create TBRs. I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it so much. So this follows a group of teenagers that have gone through a tragedy. One of their boyfriends has died, and so a year later the girlfriend is still looking for answers, and so she decides to meet up with them for like a weekend kind of thing, and something happens where they are all killed, or they're not really dead, but they're in this Neverworld Wake, and so only one of them can survive, and so they all have to choose which one can survive, which one of them can survive. So it was really, really interesting. Had never read anything like this before. It was engaging, intriguing. It was quite a page turner. Really, really enjoyed it. Very atmospheric. I love when a book has like really dark, stormy kind of vibes, and this had a lot of it. But very, very interesting and unique. If you haven't read this one, I highly, highly recommend it. The next book that I read for the month of November is The Neighbors by Hannah Mary McKinnon. This book was recommended to me by one of my friends over on Bookstagram, Eleni. I hope that's how you say your name, because that's how I've been saying it this whole entire time. We have become really close friends, and she one day texted me that she had just finished reading this book and was raving about it. So right that minute I opened Amazon up and I ordered it, and oh my god, this was like so good. It was like a page turner. It was like one of these books where you're like, what? And no, like that. It was an adventure of its own. So here we follow two couples, and they somehow become neighbors, and the wife of this family and the husband of this family know each other from a steamy past, and so they end up being neighbors, and there's secrets, there's death, there's lies, and all this kind of stuff. This is marketed as a thriller, but I did not get very thrillery vibes from it. It was more like very soap opera-ish with a tinge of thriller, if that makes sense. But it was it was a page turner for sure. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. There's a twist in here that I was not expecting, and overall it was a fantastic read. So again, 5 stars. The next book that I read, it was a little disappointing because I was looking forward to this book so much, but either way, it is The Bird Eater by Anya Alborn. She is a horror writer, which I hear very, very, very good things about, and I decided to start with this book because I just look at that cover. I mean, this cover alone freaked me out. Like, every time I look at this, I get just chills. Like, that's just, I mean, this is disturbing. And I gave this book 3 stars. Here we follow this boy, Aaron, and he suffers some tragedies where just family members just die. His mother died, his aunt died, because he stayed in the care of his aunt. He stayed in his aunt's care. Oh my gosh, can I even talk? Again, I can never talk. And his aunt ends up dying. His uncle dies or is already dead when we start the book. And so very, very traumatic kind of upbringing. And so he ends up going away from this town that he lived in. And so years later, he suffers some more tragedy. His son dies, and he is almost like, his therapist recommends that he goes back to this town and just try to work on himself. Obviously his marriage is rocky, and so he ends up going back to this small town where he grew up and to the same house where all this tragedy happens. And so upon returning to this town, I forgot what the name of the town is, just weird things start happening. The house itself is believed amongst the town to be like haunted, and kids would just go in there and see if they can like find stuff. And so as he's deciding to like just clean up the house and rebuild it and remodel it, while he's doing this boy appears with like this sinister kind of grin, blood on his teeth, and just things start happening from there. It was a really creepy read, but the ending to me just fell flat. There was a lot of things that weren't explained. Starting with the little kid, which his name is Birdie, I believe is what they call this little, like, this sinister kid. Let's call him Sinister. I remember the first time that he came up on the scene, it really freaked me out. Like, I was like, what in the world? Like, I'm like, I don't even think I'm gonna be able to read this book. But continuing with the story, it wasn't what I expected. It really wasn't anything that really creeped me out or scared me, except for the description of the little boy. I am interested in reading other things from Anya because I feel like this had a lot of potential, but somewhere along the line it just dropped it for me. We also follow this girl that he was in love with and dated when they were in, I think the tragedies happen when he's in middle school, and he's sent away while he's in middle school, and he had these 2 really, really good friends. One of them, which was, you know, I guess his first love, and vice versa, her first love, and they just like pick up where they left off from. So it was just, I don't know, it dropped the ball for me somewhere along the line. But still, I gave it 3 stars because I did enjoy the descriptions, the creepiness, because there was like a lot of creepiness for it. It dropped the ball in the end for me, so that's why I only gave it 3 stars. So yeah, I hope I'm making sense, because I just feel like I'm like and I am just not making any sense. Next book I read is Lizzie's Story by Stephen King, and oh my god, this book was such a surprise to me. I loved it. I ended up reading this book for the Tome Topple, which was last month. It's one of my favorite books of all time. This is my 2nd Stephen King book, and I am hooked. Like I told you guys in my last wrap up, I read Christine, and I ended up loving it. Well, this one has made me just fall in love with Stephen King even more. This book starts off really, really slow, extremely slow. I was not invested at all. By like 100 pages in, it was boring. It was just like, oh, like, come on, like. But I just kept reading it because I had heard that it is very slow to begin with. It's really, really hard for me to describe and summarize this book because there's so much that happens in this book. We follow Lizzie and the story of her and her husband and her 25-year marriage. When we start the book, we learn that her husband had died 2 years ago. He was a best-selling novelist, and we just follow their story. This is such a just a fantastical story. There's horror involved, there is terror, there is love, there is family, there is confusion, there is so much in this book. When you start off the book within the first 100 pages, you are so lost, you are so bored, it takes a while for this book to pick up and for you to even remotely, I would say even 150 pages, for you to even start putting the pieces of this story together. I've learned, because I've heard so much how good of a storyteller Stephen King is, but I had never witnessed it until this book. I mean, yes, I loved Christine. It was a fabulous book. His character development was amazing, but his storytelling, I really got to know it in this book. We learn also that Lizzie didn't know a lot about her husband upon meeting him. It was a very vague, like she really didn't know him. She just knew that she loved him and she had a great time with him. And she really started to get to know him through his books. He had a very, very traumatic and just bad upbringing. And so I don't want to say too much about it, because yes, it is a thick book and so much happens in this. But like I said before, I think I told you guys, I went into this book completely blind. I hadn't even read the synopsis or the summary or anything to do with the book, and I just started reading it. And I was so in love. I mean, this book had me crying, it had me laughing, it had me thinking of my relationship with my husband, because it's just one of those marriages that you're just like, you know, the craziness, the love, it was just so fantastic. I gave it 5 stars. I think that right now this is one of my favorite King reads. We'll go and see if this gets bumped down as I make my way through all of his books, but fantastic, fantastic book. Oh my gosh, I was talking about that book forever because I couldn't get the words out. Next, oh, let me grab this chunker. Next, I read The Sandman, the annotated Sandman Volume 2. I have to hold this with my shoulder because it is a beast. I ended up giving this one 3.75 stars. I was a little disappointed by it. As you guys know, I love Volume 1, but this one, it had me confused a lot of the times. I remember it happening with this one too, but there is almost like midway through the book, there is like a disconnect from like the beginning of the book. I'm gonna put it down because it's kind of heavy. From the beginning of it to like to the end of it, there's a middle portion that just, it doesn't connect. Now granted, these are volumes and issues of the Sandman put together, so it's kind of hard to distinguish like where one, I mean, you know where one ends and the other one begins, but it's so much crammed into one book that you almost lose your way midpoint to it, and there's no correlation whatsoever to some of these graphic novels. Just, I love Morpheus. I love his story. Whenever he comes into the scenes, it's just like, it's amazing. And one of the complaints that I have, just like this one right here, is that for me at least, I don't know if it's just that I love him so much, but for me, I just don't get enough of him. I don't get enough of him. He almost comes in at the ending of the issue or the volume. I guess you would call it an issue. Like the ending of the issue, he comes in and almost ties in the whole story together within the issue. But it's just not enough for me. I love him so much. I love when he speaks. Whenever he comes on the scene, it's like he brings everything. It's like a cohesiveness that he brings into it. But there's not much of him. I don't know if that makes sense. I wish I would see more of his family too, the Desires. No, the Endless. I'm thinking about Desire. I just wish we would see a little bit more of the Endless as well, which is the whole entire family, but more so of Morpheus. I love his character, but 3.75, I still really enjoyed it. It was just that part that was just a bit confusing to me, and there's really no way to describe this book because it's just a lot of moving parts within it. And then the last and final book that I read was the Monstrumologist. And then the last and final book that I read, oh wow. The last and final book that I read was The Monstrumologist by Rick Yancey. And I really enjoyed this book. I don't know where to categorize this. I thought this was middle grade, but apparently it's an adult book. I can see how it's an adult book because this book is sorry about the glare. This book is extremely gory, extremely disgusting. The descriptions of the smells and the creatures and the monsters are just so grotesque that I can see where it can be an adult book. But for me, in my mind, I always saw this as a middle grade. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. So in this book, we follow Will Henry. Actually, the whole book is Will Henry's diary, and Will Henry is the apprentice. He is an orphan, but he is an apprentice of the monstrumologist, which is Mr. Worthrop. And we start to learn about this story because this woman is given this diary that is found. And in this diary, Will Henry just talks about all the things that he went through with this monstrumologist. One night, this man shows up at their home late into the wee hours of the night with this package. And within this package, there is just this monster. And so their journey starts off with trying to find how this monster got to this graveyard. And so they're trying to follow this monster. They're trying to find the story of how this monster came to be in their town. There's tragedies that happens, death. It's very, very descriptive and gory. There's a lot of blood, a lot of guts within this. It was just such an entrancing little book. Very disturbing, extremely disturbing. I did find, though, the only reason why I didn't give this 5 stars is because I did find that the writing of it sometimes made me fall asleep. I don't fall asleep a lot when I read books. I'm normally pretty hooked in a story, but the olden writing style, because you got to realize that this diary that they find is years and years, and I mean hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's a very olden kind of writing, and so I found myself falling asleep a lot through this book. But the scenes where they were like hunting the monsters, they end up going to like this sanatorium, where there are sick people and crazy people, and the descriptions and the smells that they describe are just horrifying. Besides the writing of it that kept boring me a little bit, the actual story was really, really, really good, and I am eager to see what the second book brings. I actually buddy read this with one of my friends over on Instagram, so hi to Stephanie, and thank you so much for reading this book with me. She had to wait for me a little bit because I kept falling asleep, and she had finished the book and I was like, oh my gosh. I think I finished like a week after she finished, but it was a great time reading that with her, and had a lot of fun. Please let me know in the comments down below what books you read, which ones were your favorite of the month. I think that I would have to give my favorite read in November to Lizzie's Story. I love that book so much. I related to it, and that's the thing, I related to the book with the relationship that she had with her husband to the relationship that I have with my Cheech. So that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you in my next one. Bye.